Hi, everyone. As I mentioned outside, we have literally saved the very best for last. And thank you all for sticking it out with us. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Stacy Phillips, who is a Victim Justice Program Specialist at the Office for Victims of Crime. She has, over the past 20 years, created, implemented, and monitored a wide array of national victim programs. She has spearheaded demonstration initiatives on reducing child fatalities and serious injuries. She currently leads the OVC's Opioid Drug Addiction Crisis Initiative. She is also a child and youth expert with a focus on trauma and brain science. She represents OVC on the DOJ Prison Rape Elimination Act Working Group, as well as the White House School Safety Interagency Police Committee. Child advocates, right, for any type of victim are what drives a lot of our work. And so we are grateful that Stacy has joined us today and will help moderate this next panel on MDTs. We've been talking about this throughout the past couple of days, and we have a rare opportunity to see one in work, in practice, and see how they function. So again, welcome, Stacy, and thank you to the panel.
I'm going to stand on this like Chris did. Well, welcome back. I think we'll kind of welcome back. Welcome back to this room. Good afternoon. Clearly saved the best for last, except for Andy's listening session. I'm a little biased, so just kidding. Welcome to the value of participating on elder abuse multidisciplinary teams. I'm going to put a little shout out here as people continue to walk in. Those of you that may not have multidisciplinary teams in your states or in your counties or areas, for those of us, we have technical assistants, Talitha Gwen Schaefer, who unfortunately couldn't be here. That's the only reason why I'm standing right here, as well as our team from Weill Cornell and Lifespan. If you guys are in here, if you could just raise your hand so everyone knows where to find you. I see they're in the back over here. So elder abuse multidisciplinary teams, also known as MDTs, help communities respond to the complex needs of the older adults that they serve by recognizing the importance of collaboration across disciplines. So really playing nice in the sandbox. These teams facilitate more effective and efficient investigations and are often noted to have better outcomes for older adults. So in this session, we're going to hear from Montgomery County Elder Abuse Multidisciplinary Team, so right here in our backyard, who are going to walk you through a real case to showcase the anatomy of an MDT meeting and discuss the benefits of collaboration with law enforcement investigations. So I'm super happy to introduce you to Captain Jordan Satinsky, who's going to discuss the work of their team. And he started in law enforcement in 1999 and currently serves as the director of the Montgomery County Police Department Community Engagement Division. He has had an impressive career in law enforcement, and I encourage all of you to read his bios and all of the members of the MDT. So I'm going to let's give a warm welcome to Captain Satinsky and let him introduce his team.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate that. Actually, I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to let them do it. I give you Ms. Feinstein.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Debbie Feinstein. I work for the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office, which is the local jurisdiction prosecutor, and we're adjacent to Washington, D.C. I'm the chief of our Special Victims Division, and I'm also the co-chief of a division called Crimes Against Seniors and Vulnerable Adults that we started about 8 or 9 years ago to marry physical abuse and neglect cases involving elders and vulnerable adults with the financial exploitation that we often see that exists at the same time. So that's my role, and I'll pass it to Julia.
Good afternoon. My name is Julia McGlamory. I am with Adult Protective Services of Montgomery County, Maryland. I am an Adult Protective Services supervisor, and I've been with this program for the past 11 years, both as an investigator and a supervisor. It's my pleasure to be here.
And good afternoon. My name is Mario Rosessen. I'm the administrator for our Adult Protective Services and Adult Services. And I want to congratulate Julia, who's just promoted to acting assistant administrator, deputy administrator this week. So well deserved. And I've been with our department, the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, for 30 plus years as a caseworker, investigator, supervisor, administrator. And certainly one of the highlights of my career has been being a part of our multidisciplinary task force, and glad to talk about that here today.
Thank you very much. Everybody hear me? Good. Sorry, I have a problem. I can't stay seated. So I apologize. Plus, it keeps everybody awake if I'm not sitting down there. So again, thank you guys very much for coming. This group here, these three folks and myself, prior to 2013, didn't exist in this current construct. Our Adult Protective Services, Police Department, State's Attorney's Office, when it came to these cases, we came to it in 3 separate silos, which meant that our victims got interviewed, if they were still living, 3 separate times. We created 3 separate times to re-victimize them completely by accident, and we ended up with completely different results. On our records from Montgomery County Police prior to 2013, we handled 12 adult abuse investigations. That's it. In a county of roughly 1.1 million. I think there's a few more than that going on. So when my background was in homicide before I came into this world, and my last case before I left homicide happened to be an elder abuse case. It was an elder abuse case that ended in a homicide where a granddaughter and daughter, a wife and a daughter, basically stopped feeding dad and he died in the house right there in front of them, and they waited a few days to contact us. Very pleasant. When I tried to get in touch with these guys, and to be clear, none of them existed in their current roles at the time, so I don't want to blame them. I got a lot of pushback. I even got pushback from my own department. My own domestic violence elder abuse unit, who specialized in this, told me, they're dead, it's your problem. So as time went on, and I got promoted and put into this position, one of the things I really wanted to do, and I got lucky because I found the right people here, and it was totally by happenstance, was getting us together to work together to share information, to figure out how to make these things better. And the case study that we're going to do later shows that, shows how we ended that, and how and what's happening now is totally opposite of what we did all those years ago. In my background, and for most of you in law enforcement, and do we have any prosecutors in here? Okay, how's change? How does everybody like change? It's awesome, right? You're like, yes. My academics are like, oh yeah, it's fine. I don't know what's going on. Just don't move my office. But no, seriously, nobody likes change. So now you want me as the cop. This is the direction I get from my captain at the time. Hey, I need you to fix the elder abuse stuff, and I want you to work with the state's attorney and APS to figure it out. Okay. You ever try to call APS anywhere or any government agency? It's like calling 311. And he'll attest to that, Mr. Rosen. So eventually, at the time, I had not worn a uniform in about 10 years. I threw one on and wandered over to our Adult Protective Services office, because guess what doesn't happen when you walk around in a uniform? Nobody stops you. You do anything you want. I just walked right past security. Go inside, get up to wander around, and eventually find Mario wandering around, and he's the only person out of all the people in that building that said, what are you doing here? And literally, I looked like a lost child at the mall. I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at. These acronyms mean nothing. Everything's big. Books are huge. I mean, police stations, the books are like that except for the law, right? Everything else is this big. So eventually we ended up talking for the next 3.5 hours about how to model our adult abuse investigations after a model that's already out there, which is a world I also had come from and he had some interest in, which was Child Protective Services, right? Child Protective Services and police have been working together for years. But we also have a lot of legislation because they're kids that help us out so we can share information, do those types of things, and it's easy. But once you hit 18, what happens? The veil of HIPAA appears, and no one can talk to each other. So we got to figure it out. And Mario's group actually found a small part of Maryland law which allows us to talk as long as there's an open criminal investigation. Well, guess what? We have suddenly had a whole lot of open and criminal investigations. But I wasn't lying about it. I want to be very clear. We didn't know what we had. So the basis for the MDT was getting us together to begin with, right? How do we talk to one another? How do we engage one another? Because cops and social workers, they have a very different view of one another, right? Cops think social workers are all cuddles, and social workers think cops are all come in and blow the door down, and everybody thinks the attorneys just want everything wrapped up in a bow and done, or they argue with you. No offense, Debbie. But I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of ego involved, right? On all sides. I'll take it myself. I'm not going to say there isn't. These folks dropped that. And our bosses started to back away from it once they saw the successes. Because a lot of times elder abuse is what? What do we think about elder abuse now in our society? Outside of this room here, what's the standing for the most of society? Say it again. It's a family problem. Anybody who's old enough like me and has white hair, where did we used to hear that? Did I hear it right? I think I heard somebody say over domestic violence, late 80s, early 90s, right? Same thing. Oh, they're old. Oh, they already have something wrong with them. It's a family problem. Police don't need to be involved. These folks don't need to be involved. Somebody else can take care of it. Close the door, be gone. But Mario's group and Julia's group taught us what to look for. They taught us what to look for on the scenes by us going out together on these scenes. I don't know, or I didn't know, what a 4th-degree decubitus ulcer was until I met these guys. I couldn't even spell it. I'm not even sure I could spell it now. But we learned. They didn't understand Miranda. We explained that to them. They come and watch our interrogations and feed us information, so we know the questions to ask. We let them do the victim interviews a lot of times, if it's possible, because they have an expertise in that we don't know. And we get information right behind them, and we'll feed them information. And then we can take that, we give it all to Debbie Shop, and she can build a case from there. And they've had a lot of successful prosecutions. And as Debbie said, they actually built a unit around this in the state's attorney's office because of the workload and the increase, and specialized people. Now, I know financial crimes is probably 80%, and if I'm wrong for most of the jurisdictions, 80% of the crimes that occur in this world, right? The elder abuse part or adult abuse part is probably that other 20, at least for us. Having these MDTs be able to work through those specialized cases where you have abuse, there's emotional, physical trauma, whatever it may be, is really, really important. And getting to sit down regularly with folks keeps it sustainable. How many people have had groups they thought, oh, this is going to be great, we're going to do it, and it was like a month, maybe 2 it lasted, and then all of a sudden people weren't coming back, just kind of fizzled out because there wasn't a direction? That's where Debbie comes in. I can't run a meeting to save my life. Debbie, on the other hand, was able to go through and reconstitute our MDT and really build it around all these folks and bring all these partners in from all over the county and even the state at some point, depending on the issue, because of the way our state's set up. So MDTs, when conducted correctly and codified and with MOUs, you can really keep it going, but you also need to have the right people. And we were just talking, the right people to do this kind of stuff are here. And most people back in your local jurisdictions, your cases are what? Doing nothing, right? They're sitting there collecting dust until you get back and they're like, oh, I got 5 more I got to worry about. The other part of this, the victims, what do they get out of this? They don't get that re-victimization I just discussed. They get the one time, hopefully, right? The one time. And now, especially with the advent of technology, for those who don't know what this is not my cigarette lighter. This is my body-worn camera, which I get to wear in my belt. I'm not actually sure it works. But as a captain, I don't really have to use it. But we have that video. We can see on scene exactly what happens, which is something we didn't have when I was a young officer. It didn't exist. So we get a very different view to show our juries and our prosecutors than we had in the past. There we go. Collaboration is really key to the whole thing. Having everybody on the same page is so important. Look, we have all had our differences, correct? It's like, oh yeah, we've all argued about things, good natured, right? I don't hold anything against them and vice versa. And we all come at this with the same want in the end, but different lenses. And it's important to really understand that. And by not getting together, not meeting regularly, you miss that. By not working together, you miss that. How many teams have you worked on? My cops in here where it was gelled and worked really, really well for a long time. And then 1 or 2 people left and it fell apart, right? Because you couldn't sustain it for some reason. Something changed. By codifying it, getting to the culture, it's a thing. Since this really started up in 2013, it is now part of our culture. We are the 77th largest police agency in the country, and getting anything changed in my department is a Herculean task. And I routinely hear people call for the detectives that once worked for me, which is amazing that it's still here. And it's not drug related. One of the things I really learned about a great deal was their policies. And they learned a lot from us. I didn't understand the role and what they were told to do. I thought APS could come in, hey, we got a hurt person here. Here's an elder adult. Just please pick them up and take care of them. I've got to go find the suspect. I don't know what to do with this. Well, there's all these rules that they can't do that. I didn't know, but we were taught, right? We learned. We made some stuff up, but we learned. And we figured it out. Cops are good at that. And then when I got to Debbie's chair, it was, hey, did you guys think about this? Did you think about that? Things we never would have thought of, much like when you're doing a homicide investigation. Same thing, that third eye, that 10,000 foot mark. Hey, can you bring other things in? And we learned that. And we learned from what she could tell us about not only her education, but the policies of her office, what would work, and understanding everyone's guardrails. The MDT's got to be regular. It can't be one of these things where you have it quarterly. Weekly might be too much for some people. It depends on your jurisdiction. We found monthly works. You could always have an emergency one, and it happens. It happened when I was there. It happened when we were all together, where you'd get a major case and you say, hey guys, we got to meet tomorrow at noon. Done. Everybody's in the same room. And this was before Zoom. We had speakerphone. But we did it. And now we still do it. That constant meeting, staying engaged, keeps the group going. And I'll tell you, the group, and you correct me if I'm, actually, either of you correct me if I'm wrong, the group existed way before me, and probably before some of us, but fizzled out. 99, it fizzled out, disappeared. Because the right people weren't there and it wasn't kept up in a regular situation. What are the perks? He can call me anytime and vice versa. Because what happens when you call the general number of anywhere and ask for something? What do you get? I don't know what to do. Press 0. Agent. No, I just call Mario. Hey, I need this. Or he just calls me Jordan. I need a detective to respond to X. Oh, whatever. Fine. Done. And we just do it. And my shop and Debbie's shop, we're in the same office. Talk about dropping your egos. We all run out of the Family Justice Center and Domestic Violence Unit. So it's sheriffs, police, the domestic violence and elder abuse attorneys, and victim advocates. So you have 2 police agencies and state's attorneys, and everyone's still alive. I'll say that mostly for the victim advocates. They saved us. But they're so important. And victim advocacy is something we don't talk a lot about in police work. The victim advocacy is an integral part to all of this. Because remember what I said earlier, I don't know what to do with this victim. These guys are going to help and get them services and get them put back together as best they can. But who's going to stay along with them the whole time? My victim advocate. I can lean on that person. Hey, can you reach out to person X? I need to find out what's going on. Because they have, what, 100 cases, Julian, sitting and waiting? Yeah, they don't have time, much like you guys. The victim advocate can stay and really keep that connection. And we find better victim engagement. And we don't have as many of those, for those who know UCR and NIBRS, the CVE case closed because victim refused. A lot more engagement. So for our task force, which I don't know who picked this name, but it's a super long name and it makes our polo shirts very wide on the side. We have all the entities we believe work and have worked with us in the past. So we have the Sheriff's Department, Police Department, Fire Rescue, State's Attorneys, APS, our Ombudsman, and County Attorney in our Medical Division. We come in and we review cases together. We bring in other folks as needed. And what we're going to show you today is how these things normally run. And it's a scripted process. And there's reasons for things as they go along. And Debbie will explain her part and everybody on the way down. And the idea here, for those of you who have done cold case work, it's not to sit there and say, Jordan Stinsky messed that case up in 2000, so now we got to go back and unscrew it up. It's not that. It's the whole idea of, we're going to look at this from that 10,000 foot mark. Where do we need to fix this? Where do we need more work? Where don't we need stuff? Where's Jordan going down the wrong road? Not that she ever would, but where's Julia going down the wrong road? Those kind of things. You guys have anything you want to add?
I'll simply say that I always enjoy hearing Jordan retell the story when he came into our office with his uniform. Frankly, I thought I was going to be arrested because I don't have sergeants show up at my office door armed typically. But that was a truly important conversation. And having law enforcement reach out to Adult Protective Services was a huge statement to me. And in my mind, I was going to do everything to make sure that that worked. It got revamped. And fortunately, Debbie, incoming chair of our Elder Vulnerable Adult Abuse Task Force, we all were very committed to this. New units were being formed in the state attorney's office to focus on elder and vulnerable adult abuse. Same with the police. And because of their advocacy, when you have different departments working together, we were able to expand, and we needed to because the number of cases were rising. We were able to build a second Adult Protective Services Investigations unit. And then we went to our county council and built a third just this past year. So Julia started our second unit, and we just started a third. So that alone on infrastructure was huge. But the opportunity to work cases together, hear different perspectives, talk about response times. APS response time is a little bit different than law enforcement. We don't have cars with lights on them and so forth. And we just have different parameters that we follow and different codes. But that whole piece was so good. So yeah, Thank you, Jordan.
I'll add one thing. Thank you, Mario. When we were reconstituting our Elder Vulnerable Adult Abuse Task Force, we call it EVTAF, something like that. I don't know. It is a mouthful. We were really fortunate. Jordan mentioned the personnel, but it was not only the personnel that we had in place, Jordan, myself, Mario, it was the fact that our political people, the electeds, Jordan's boss isn't elected, but ultimately at the end of the day, Mario's is, and Julia's is, and mine is. And going to them to get buy-in was critically important to the success of what we were doing. And then ultimately it led to buy-in from our county council, new positions, and my office also benefited from getting new positions that were specifically focused on this. But we had to get the initial buy-in, build the case with data about what our numbers looked like. And because we were working together, our numbers increased incrementally over the course of years and continue to increase, not only through our collaboration on the cases themselves, but also through a lot of education and prevention work that we do together in the community. Yep. You go, Jordan?
Oh, there we go. So back to the education part. That's important. We really engaged our community in a big way. Mario let me chair with him for a couple of years World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Please, that awareness part is exceedingly important. I got in trouble for not putting that on a sign. But we got to get together and really get this out. We had police department units as well as APS and different sections of the county, the state's attorney's office, and public-private partnerships that came in with resource tables, much like you have outside, to engage the community. It wasn't us. It was the community that came in, and it built every year, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it's still going on. And because people understand that they can call us, and they've been provided that education, and they've seen us out there actually doing it, they're willing more and more to call us. We do get more calls, and Mario's group takes in all of them every day, and that information gets shared with the police department every day and vice versa, so we can figure out who has what. So we're not doing separate cases, so we are working together. It really is just getting together and talking and having a shared mission in the end. But it's also that wonderful MOU that everybody loves. That's so easy to write and keep going. I get it. They're a pain. They're horrible. But they're needed to sustain it. Because while one or two of you, or maybe more of you, might go back to your agencies and start to lay the foundation for some of this work, if that MOU isn't written and signed off on by exactly what Debbie talked about, by the bosses, as soon as you retire, it disappears. Unless you got somebody behind you that's going to pick up the ball and run with it. So you got to have that MOU in place. I have a friend of mine that's very into writing and looking at those kind of things, and I push it off to them all the time. I have no interest. I'm more interested in looking at the highlights. I don't need all the detail in the middle of it. But it's really important so everyone has a framework to go back to. And it has to be something that isn't 25 years old. It has to be something that's a living, breathing document and updated on the regular. For what reason? Why does it have to be updated? Laws change. People change. Things change. Societies change. We have an MOU on our books at the police department that's 25 years old and references laws that are no longer enforced. It has nothing to do with this, but I'm just giving you an example. So yes, keep those MOUs up. Have all of your partners write their sections. Everybody review them. Everyone goes through them. Everyone has buy-in. Don't do your stuff in a silo and then put it back on the table. You know what you end up with? A board meeting and no one knows what's going on.
And we're happy to share examples of what our MOU looks like and what the different iterations have been over the years, if anyone is interested. I think I would guess the best way to follow up is through, I'm not sure that it's through Stacy, but it's wherever your contact is, wherever, here. But we're at the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office, and I regularly send these materials out to different jurisdictions around the country as they've come to observe our task force, come in person to one of them, or we've briefed them, much like we're doing today, on how this process works.
Hi. And I just also wanted to say that the benefits are not just having this task force once a month. The benefits are also for your folks on the ground and in the field, right? So you have examples in all of your work, I'm sure, where you have one group of people working to do their best. For example, the APS social workers, and you have another group of people working and doing their best, the detectives doing these investigations. And the other one thinks they don't know what they're doing. But the more you have people investigating together and we're not talking just talking about the investigation. That first visit to that victim is together. It's a partnership investigation. So they're getting to know each other. They all know each other. They have their friends that they're happy to work with. We have tip sheets we've created where one side talks about all the rules about APS for the detectives and the other side talks about all the rules for the investigations by the police for the APS workers. And we have phone contact sheets. We've done a pizza party. So there's a lot of boots on the ground advantages to doing this as well.
You want to hit some?
Well, since we're talking about partnerships, I think, our safety awareness training is really important. I know when I first started with the department, on rare occasion, we'd have law enforcement come on out and talk about some basic safety awareness on home visits and so forth. So Jordan and I got to talking about some of the risks that our workers have. We don't go in with a partner on an investigation or home visit at this point. We're going in solo, and you were astounded because police always have partners and backups through radio and so forth. So we decided, why don't we do some self-defense work at the police academy? And I thought this would be terrific, not only for the training, so we had classroom work, and we actually had hands-on work on basic breaks and how you could get away, or just safety awareness pieces. And we worked with one of the jiu-jitsu instructors and with sweats and everything else. And I wasn't sure how our APS personnel would take to that, but they seemed pretty excited. And we did it more than once.
They took a lot of their anger out on you, on my sergeant.
That's correct. But they learned, if someone grabbed them, they knew how to, do a break and get the heck out of there. But, more importantly, if things aren't right, how do you approach a home? When do you leave? Make sure you can get out with the door. All those types of things we're able to do. And we did it in an environment where the police trained, so social workers could feel more comfortable working with law enforcement, and hopefully vice versa.
And APS was hesitant. Workers, not these folks, but the workers on the ground were hesitant to call us. A couple of reasons. As I went through my career, I found out ego, some of it. I've been doing this for years. I can handle this. I don't need anybody. I've been going to these places by myself, just like cops, right? Same stuff. I can handle this domestic violence call. I've been here 32 times at Rodriguez house. I can handle this. Same exact thing. The other part, I don't want them to mess me up. I go in there. I don't want them to lock them up. I don't want them to rough them up. They didn't realize that wasn't our role. So by having that exposure, that understanding, it really changed it. And my cops were the same way. The detectives were like, Sarge, you want us to do what? It's like, I want you to go out with the social workers. I don't need therapy. Oh, that's a different question. You do, but that's not what we're doing this for. Okay. And it was important, and they got it, and they understood it, even though they were hesitant. They were voluntold, I'm not going to lie. But in the end, they just do it now. It's part of the arc of their day. It's part of how they respond to these things, and that's what's important. Do you guys want to say anything else before I go? Okay. So we're going to move into the MDT and how we do it. We're going to do it television style, 1980s, where the camera's right here, and we're all pretend we were actually around a board table talking. We do this at our Family Justice Center. The video I'm about to put on is Detective Sergeant Jason Baum, who took over from me once I got promoted. He is the guy in the red man suit, for those who know what that is, in defensive tactics, who was the receiver of all the angst of his APS workers. One of them, he still to this day, as a former Marine, says, yeah, my thigh still hurts from one of them. He does. So we're going to take about a minute to watch the little intro video that he talks about, and then we're going to go into this case. It is an elder abuse case, and it's a case that shows where we ended up as an agency collaborating versus where we were in that previous case I talked about when I was a homicide investigator, where everybody basically told me, you're on your own. So let me see if I can make that video work.
Yeah, this isn't an emergency, but my mom's got to go to the hospital.
James Kirkland, the suspect in this case, his initial call to 911 was very, very matter of fact.
Yeah, I've been caring for her at home, and she's got either a bed sore or a hemorrhoid situation. She's in a lot of pain.
And when emergency personnel arrived, they saw something much more devastating.
The police were contacted in the Kirkland case based on a call from the hospital and a subsequent contact from Adult Protective Services.
When Ms. Kirkland was brought to the hospital, her compression stockings from earlier wound care had fused to her legs, and they had to be surgically removed. And then she had a pressure ulcer on her back, which when measured was about 11 by 13 inches. You could actually see her.
Sorry. Forgot to warn everybody about that. I do apologize.
You were supposed to stop that before the pictures.
Hmm?
You, you were supposed to stop before the pictures.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen.
Okay. All right. So we're going to do our best to kind of mock up how this works. So we most often now convene over Teams. That's the platform we use in Montgomery County. Given how busy everyone is, and we realized we actually could be super effective by using Teams and also using breakout functions on Teams so we can meet in smaller groups when necessary. We've pretty much maintained our meetings that way. So you can picture us all on a screen or all around a table. But essentially, as the chair, I call the meeting to order. I welcome everyone. We do introductions. And then we talk about our confidentiality agreement, and we ask everyone to sign our confidentiality agreement, which I'm also happy to share with you what we disseminate and what everyone has to sign for each meeting. And the confidentiality part runs, it covers the conversations that we're having in the room. Part of what I ask is that people only take necessary notes, like to-do lists, things that they need to accomplish based on the conversation rather than word for word. Everyone has a summary of the case, and everyone has their own case file because everyone in the room typically has had some relationship to this case and some involvement with this case. The reason I ask for minimal note taking is because really, by this task force being led by the state's attorney's office, it's really a work product type of conversation for those of you that are attorneys. Things that we can argue are privileged in that room and that shouldn't get disseminated elsewhere. However, if we're starting to write down word for word and specific things about the case, additional facts, we want to make sure that that's documented in a way that we can produce it to the defense versus having these conversations that are really, I wouldn't say informal, but it's a conversation that we're having. We're brainstorming. We're thinking of different ideas. So that's where sort of we draw the line on that with respect to the confidentiality piece of this. So I call the meeting to order. Everyone introduces themselves. And in this case, I would ask, and I will ask Julia to do the case presentation as APS brought this case forward for a conversation with all of the partners.
Thank you, Debbie. And just to note that any member of the task force can request to have a case discussed. I'd say 90% of the time it's usually coming from the APS social workers. So we usually start by describing the case. So I'm going to play the role of the APS investigator in this case today. There was an 87-year-old female who was reported to APS for alleged neglect by others on May 1st, 2015, after she was admitted to the ER in critically ill condition. The APS worker conducted a face-to-face assessment the same day at the hospital. The client was only slightly conscious. Her son, James Kirkland, was present at the hospital room and presented as anxious about the client's condition. He told the APS worker that he called 911 after becoming concerned about the client's increasing weakness over the last week. The client presented with significant pressure wounds, including one visible to the APS worker on the client's heel, a wound which Mr. Kirkland attributed to her wearing compression socks. Hospital staff shared with APS that the client was extremely emaciated due to dehydration. The client presented to the ER with a very severe pressure ulcer on her back and sacrum, which was stuffed with newspaper. The wound was so deep the client's spine could be seen. Photographs were taken for evidence. The client was in severe pain during that initial visit and was screaming. The client has another son who was residing in the home. His role was unclear, and in fact, when police went in, he was found unclothed and covered in feces. So his level of functioning was unclear, and his role as a potential caregiver was also unclear. APS went back and visited the client again 3 days later. The client was still in the hospital, very heavily medicated, was not alert, and was not oriented to person, place, or time. Her daughter was present, who was visiting from out of state. The daughter disclosed that her mother, the client, had always lived with her 2 adult sons. She didn't visit very often, and she spoke to them on the phone a couple times a year. She disclosed that the client used to sleep in a bed upstairs, but began sleeping on the couch on the first level because she could no longer climb the stairs. She was unsure of this timeline. At some point, the couch became too cluttered and she began to sleep on a lawn chair in the living room. She reported that all 3 adults in the home had hoarding behaviors. She was very incontinent of bowel and bladder, which increased her care needs. Here were her diagnoses at the hospital. Sacral decubitus ulcer, stage 4, lymphedema of lower extremities, sepsis, hypovolemia, hyponatremia, failure to thrive, hypotension, osteomyelitis, dementia, hypoalbuminemia. Sorry, that was a little bit tough for me. And her ADL score, which is activities of daily living, how well does she function independently, was a 1 out of 30. So very, very severe on that scale. We also found out that she was a patient at a wound clinic from February to March of that same year, but she was only being treated for the wound on her lower legs. They had no record or knowledge of any wound on her sacrum at the time. They did say that she presented often at the wound clinic with an odor of feces and was very disheveled.
So from that point, we would ask if anybody had any questions about the situation at hand. Most people are still trying to figure out all the medical diagnoses to see what they are, especially the cops in the room. When this first came out in this discussion, when we had it originally, just listening to the list, I was horrified. So I'll give the role of what we did as the detective who was responsible for this. So we were called by fire rescue. Our fire rescue and police dispatch is combined. So for those who understand that, that's the reason why I'm talking about it this way. Our fire rescue was contacted by a 911 caller, stated that his mother was ailing and had a festering wound of some sort. Fire rescue got there and put a pause on everything and realizing that something else was going on. There was some extreme wounds on this woman that they found, a female in her 80s. They contacted patrol. Patrol came out right away. And as a sidebar, the patrol officer who responded was a 30-year officer who called me and was basically like, "This is the worst thing I've seen in my career." So they held the place. We went down there. I sent a team to the hospital, the original investigator, as well as a partner for her from APS went as well. And then we took 3 or 4 down to the house to do the search warrant and secure it. When we went inside, how many of you have seen a house like this? How many of you live in a house like this? I have kids. So this is what we encountered when we walked in the door. And this is in an area of Montgomery County, which is just on the northwest side of the District of Columbia, or rather up style type neighborhood, where you wouldn't expect this to happen, which lends things to this happens everywhere. It's not just in one place or another. So our officers went in. Let's see if I can get to the next thing. There we go. If you look here, the picture on the left, folks, is the pattern injury we found on the victim's back at the hospital. We didn't know what it was at first, and the detective, this was just in the burgeoning era of being able to send pictures to one another on a phone, sent this to us at the scene, and we figured it out in about 10 seconds that it was this chair when we found a broken one right behind it. Turns out she'd been living in that chair for quite some time. That's a bunch of newspapers and diapers beneath her, so she could use that as her bathroom. The entire house was covered in newspapers and feces, as well as this yellowish powder. We couldn't figure out what it was at first. It turned out to be cornstarch. We took the suspect to a local district station, which was nearby. And during our interview of the suspect, we did a non-custodial because we actually didn't even really know what we had at the time, to be honest. And she was still alive. He had admitted to that his mother had these wounds and that he was taking care of her based on an internet search he did for wound care, which said by adding cornstarch and newspaper, it will stop wounds. When the hospital went in and removed what they didn't know it was in her back, it turned out to be newspaper. They found bits and pieces of it all over her body, as well as several ulcers that had gauze pads layered like on top quite a bit. He had no other explanation as to what was going on. He had no reasoning for the other brother we ended up finding in the house. We determined it was a brother with some severe IDD issues, and APS handled getting him taken care of, which was great. We continued our investigation. We're able to work out through this that he was definitely the only caregiver that we could tell. The other relative was an out-of-state relative that really had no contact with the family for quite some time outside of by phone. We are looking to move forward with this and charge him with the first-degree elder abuse statute for the state of Maryland, as well as a host of other charges.
So Captain, I have a question. So
Yes, sir.
You did arrest one of the sons that night, right?
Well, we took him back to the
Yeah.
station. It wasn't an arrest. We took him back to the station
Okay.
and did what we call a non-custodial interview, and he was free to leave at any time. We just wanted to talk to him to find out what was going on.
And the other brother that was found naked, he was taken to the hospital.
Correct. He was taken to the hospital. He was not verbal. As a matter of fact, while one of the officers was searching the house as we were clearing it for the search warrant, he was up on the second floor and the brother popped up naked, covered in feces from underneath the newspaper and was almost shot when the officer came around the corner. And again, completely nonverbal.
Okay. Julia, are we opening an APS case on that brother?
I haven't been assigned it yet.
Okay, that's right. You're not the supervisor. We're gonna open up a case on that guy. Okay, good.
So at this point, the initial response is on May 1st, 2015. And the initial response by police is, that day, APS is involved almost simultaneously to work the investigation together with the police. And within, it looks like, I was just looking back at the dates, within a week or so, we actually convened our first multidisciplinary team meeting to discuss this case. And I believe the initial arrest, correct me if I'm wrong, was for abuse or neglect of a vulnerable adult. Is that correct?
Yes.
So our statute has different levels of neglect. There's sort of a first degree neglect of a vulnerable adult and then a second degree. The vulnerable adult includes death and serious physical injury. And there's a few other criteria there as well. But that was the initial charging decision that was made. And Julia, over those couple of weeks, did you go and visit the client again?
I did. I visited her twice within 4 days at the hospital.
And at any point, was she able to have a conversation with you?
No, the first visit, she was alert, but in so much pain that it was impossible to have a conversation. And the second visit, she was not alert and she was not oriented.
So ultimately, when the then became the defendant, James Kirkland was arrested, and my office was alerted that this was going to happen, and we were ready to cover the case at the bond hearing the next day. That's how our system typically works. Unless you get in by a certain time, you're on the bonds docket for the next day. And we were ready to be able to ask for the appropriate conditions in this case that would relate to this defendant. But at that point, again, we had a neglect case and we didn't really know what else we had yet. And ultimately, what happened to this client? Was she transferred somewhere else from the hospital?
Well, one of my concerns before we get to the transfer piece was I don't want James coming back and pulling her out of that home. So what can law enforcement do to make sure that doesn't happen? He's not in jail yet, right?
One of the things we did, and remember what I said earlier, we just made things up. We got together with the hospital security and charge nurses, because if there's any doctors in here, no offense, but the charge nurses run your ER and they're great. We went and basically said, look, we have situations like this. How do we hide these folks from their aggressors? Mm-hmm. So we made up something called the shield thing, where unless it was one of us, nobody got information. And it really worked out well because that guy was calling the hospital. He was trying to get to his mother. And so we were able to keep it away very quickly. And that was something we learned during one of our first cases. We didn't know. Like we just encountered, what the heck is going on here? So learning things, right? And this is through that collaborative process that we built this.
And this was prior to the arrest. So we didn't have the bond conditions in place that included a stay away from the home and also from his mother. Ultimately, that was made, part of the case once it came in as an arrest, and we were setting those conditions. So what happened with her next?
Julia, is there any other family involved that we can work with?
Yeah, that's what I was concerned about, Mario, as the worker, because she can't communicate with us, she can't consent to any kind of discharge plan. So I was very worried about who might make that decision for her. We don't want to place the son who might have done this to her in the position of being the decision maker. So I was able to talk with her daughter from out of town, who said she would be happy to be that surrogate decision maker for this client in this case.
That's good, because the hospital administrator did call and they wanted to move this client. quickly and was at the level of hospice care. So I'm glad that we have a surrogate decision maker. Otherwise, we'd have to talk about going for guardianship of person and property. So that's good.
So that was our first MDT, was sort of getting all of these pieces in place, making sure that the placement of the individual that could speak for the mother, that was the daughter, care for the son who clearly couldn't care for himself either, and then also trying to figure out the next step for the victim in this case. So what ultimately, we convened again, and in our follow-up conversation, we talked about what the next steps were that APS took once she was released, the victim was released from the hospital.
So as follow-up, I was assigned the son as another case. It turned out that he was not as impaired as we originally thought, and he had some mental health conditions that were contributing to his behaviors. So he was assessed eventually to have the ability to make his own decisions and ultimately live independently with some supports. The daughter helped us make decisions about his discharge plans as well. The client was discharged to an inpatient hospice where she lived for just a few weeks longer. The son who was the perpetrator was banned from visiting because of the stay away order. She did die peacefully at the hospice with lots of pain medication and her daughter at her side.
So after the death, as the prosecutors, we started to think, is there something else that we want to charge this defendant with? And the prosecutor on my team at the time actually put together a very extensive memo doing an analysis of all the different theories that we could have. We knew that we had a first degree of vulnerable adult abuse resulting in death. That's what the original charge at the time that the charge came down, she hadn't passed yet, but it's the same charge for the serious physical injury resulting from neglect or death. So that's a felony in Montgomery County. But now she had passed, and we were waiting for an autopsy to see what was the autopsy going to conclude with respect to the reasons that she died. And that actually took, I was looking at it, that actually took about 6 months to get back. So in the meantime, we indicted him. We brought the case to the grand jury, and he was indicted on that neglect of a vulnerable adult charge. But we were waiting for the autopsy to get more information. And the autopsy, when it came back on December 1st, and we shared this with our MDT, said that the manner of death was homicide and the cause of death was pneumonia associated with complications of decubitus ulcers resulting from neglect. So we were considering, is this, and this is, your jurisdictions are all going to be different, but we were considering, is this involuntary manslaughter? Is this some sort of depraved heart type of murder, which is second-degree murder in Montgomery County? Or is there some, specific premeditated intent that we could prove, malice aforethought, that we could prove with respect to a first-degree murder charge? We pretty quickly ruled that out in terms of the first degree. When we've charged first degree in these cases, it's often been a combination of a financial exploitation and a reason that the person is allowing their parent, sister, brother decline. We didn't have that in this case. We didn't have the financial element. We knew we didn't have a first degree assault. So we began to consider, what else do we have? And the considerations were the history of treatment at a wound care clinic. We knew that the suspect had taken his mother before, but not for all of the wounds, but the wounds on her foot. We had all of those records. The physical and mental state upon admission to the ER on May 1st. And also considered the fact that she had a history of dementia and she required assistance with her ADLs. And the questions that we asked were, what was his legal duty of care? Was the son's neglect the proximate cause of death, and was there malice? And what we were able to look at again in terms of the elements that we had to prove, we knew if we could prove that he had a legal duty of care and his neglect of his mother was the proximate cause of her death, we believed we had an involuntary manslaughter charge. What we couldn't prove was element 3, which was, could we prove malice? And our estimation of the case and our review of the case and our conversations with the multidisciplinary team, we didn't believe that we could prove malice. The son had made a number of statements with respect to, what he knew about his mother, and he said that he, we consider that basically the following factors, and that we were able to demonstrate his awareness and consequences of his act or failure to act. The visible injuries, he knew about the wounds, he knew how to get care for her or get help. He had sought past help for her, that he deliberately failed to act, that he took upon himself to do this newspaper cornstarch horrifying treatment, that he had the financial resources to get her help, because that's something we have to consider also is, does the person have the resources, either the mental wherewithal to get the help or the actual, money, time, car, all that kind of stuff to be able to get the help. And the last one was the defendant in his statement claimed that he was giving her palliative care. So he really put himself in the role of the caregiver. He was the one giving treatment. This is what he thought was best. And ultimately, we made a decision to charge him with involuntary manslaughter and with vulnerable adult abuse, neglect, in the first degree. Do you want me to go on to that next? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up sort of the criminal piece of this. He was ultimately acquitted by the jury of involuntary manslaughter. We see this a lot in our elder abuse cases. There's a sympathy factor, and you may see this too, because he was in the position really of being the sole caregiver for his very ill mother. And people, I think, well, they could find a legal duty of care and find that he was the proximate cause of her death, connecting up the fact that really he was responsible for her death in a direct way, even though we explain what involuntary murder is, even though we explained that it was his failure to act. That was not where the jury went with this case. And I actually reviewed the whole memo that our prosecutor had written about this, and she was very deliberate. And again, you can see reflected there her conversations with Mario, with Julia, with Jordan to try to figure this out and which direction to go. And he was ultimately sentenced to 10 years and then 3 years of probation. And that was the sentence he got on the neglect of a vulnerable adult in the first degree.
So before we go into the Q&A session, the first lacking this MDT, the case I talked about earlier, the homicide case from years ago, that took 2.5 years. And it was me and one of Debbie's prosecutors that stayed on it for the whole time. And the two of us actually went to different places in both our respective departments, and we're still doing it over this time. And it took that long to get it done. This got done in 6 months. And it's got done correctly. Remember, speed's not always our friend in the criminal justice system, right? We make missteps, and the system's set up to make sure the wrong people don't get put in prison. So based on all these things, all this collaboration, we were able to bring this to a close in a positive manner.
And start the conversation within a week or so of the initial call out by police and APS. And I will tell you, particularly for those prosecutors in the room, having that kind of involvement and engagement from essentially moment one is critically important to our ability to build the case and to be able to prove it. We're looking for things that we're going to ultimately need to present to a jury. That's sort of the presumption that it's going to be a jury trial. And how are we building those things? What things need to be, looked at or looked at again? We talk about the search warrant execution. We talk about whether there's additional things that need to be done with respect to search warrants. And although it didn't apply in this case, are there warrants that need to be written for electronic devices? We often see in these cases people Googling, what to do. Particularly when we've had cases where the person has failed to act and their family member has died in their presence. We sometimes get a lot of hits like that, but we're working together to talk about what is the next step, what is the evidence that we're going to look for, and simultaneously staying on top of and knowing how this family is being cared for. So if she hadn't died so quickly, we would stay on top of it, and learn from APS what was going on in that hospice care. Did she regain her capacity? Was she able to communicate about it? Do we need to go and have another conversation with her? Obviously, that's not what happened in this case, but the collaboration and the knowing what each other is doing is really important. And we've really found over time that we've had much better outcomes since we started collaborating, meaning the right thing has happened. It's not always that we prosecute. That is not always the route that we go. There are times that our MDT comes together. We have a conversation about a case, and we decide that the case should stay with Adult Protective Services and with the county attorney's office. The guardianship needs to be established by someone else, and that a different path needs to be followed. But again, we're critically looking together with contributions of everyone to figure out that next course and that next path.
Thank you. You guys have anything else?
No.
Okay. So we're going to open it up for some questions. I think there's a mic over there if I see it. And I think another one in the back. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. We'll answer as best we can. Just raise up and ask. They're like, it's after lunch. I want to go to bed.
Well, don't everybody ask at once.
I was going to ask the audience a question. How many, by a show of hands, are engaged, or does your jurisdiction have an elder or vulnerable adult abuse multi-D task force? It's pretty good, half plus. It's good to hear.
Do you-
I was going to say, if there's things that y'all are doing that you didn't hear us talk about, let us know what you're up to. And we want to, we are constantly looking to improve.
Again, I'm from Tennessee, and our state law actually mandates that each jurisdiction has a VAPIT meeting minimal of quarterly. It's a vulnerable adult prosecution investigative team. And each jurisdiction gets together with the main police departments in that jurisdiction, which may be all rural counties. And they discuss the cases that we get in through APS referrals. Law enforcement is there. Mental health and substance abuse is there. Our Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities is there. And then the detectives that usually handle that department's paperwork. So it's Sergeant Edwards in one of the counties. And we all discuss it. We go from TBI as support. And then the district attorney runs the meeting. And then we discuss the cases, the referrals that come in, and some say, well, it's just going to be APS, or we're working this together, or we've got subpoenas out, or whatever's kind of going on with the case at that time. But it's mandated through our legislature that it's done at a minimum of quarterly, and they have to do an annual report at the end of the year.
Thank you for sharing. That's terrific. One of the things that we do is we actually share every neglect or abuse or we do an exploitation, do financial exploitation with the state attorney's office and then law enforcement as well. So they, we may not meet with that particular case, but they may call us back and say, we've seen something, or even our rule outs where we don't bring it in because it has to be a vulnerable adult, someone who has a physical, mental, cognitive challenge. We may not be able to go there, but there might be something criminal that the state attorney, law enforcement pick up on, which we appreciate.
And we instituted that process, I guess, about 10 years ago, where, 2013, okay, 11 years ago, where all of the APS reports, rather than coming in, they were coming in a big stack, like once every month or so. And we started to do a daily receipt of them. So we're getting the referrals in real time. And we were eventually able to convince our county council to give us a position in my office for essentially a case manager / investigators to do that first review of all of the referrals that come in. Again, so in real time, we're acting on them and can walk down the hall and have a conversation with the police, excuse me, with the police about it literally just around the corner. Someone else go. I'm catching.
I was going to say
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the opposite is true as well. So APS, all the APS supervisors in our intake team get all of the assignments of detectives in the special victims unit whenever it's an elder abuse case.
So there's lots of different ways the cases come in to our office, which may be true for all of you as well. Sometimes they'll also just come directly to our office, and then we engage our multidisciplinary partners.
I am from Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, and I heard earlier, it's just a small thing, but I wanted verification. Are you saying that you signed a confidentiality agreement each time you meet, or that's each time you meet?
Every time we meet, we put a link actually in the chat in our online profile so people fill it out.
And then secondly, how does APS report? Do you have a formal reporting form or document that has certain information that is consistently generated?
Yes, ma'am. You're in CJAMS too, right?
I don't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're not in our office. Yes, I'm sorry. We have the state of Maryland has a case management database that we use for all of our APS documentation. And that actually, there's a beautiful form that gets created every time a case gets created. And we don't have to recreate anything. We could just print out that form and send it right over.
So you use that form and you share that with the MDT?
Yes, because we have that MOU. So.
Okay, that's what I wanted clarification, because right now I'm getting just emails with a summary. And we have discussed with our APS office how we could do it better so I could get consistent information.
If you email me, are they going to get a copy of the slides? If you do, our email addresses are on there. If you email me, I can give you the words of the form, the verbiage of the form to ask for that.
Thank you very much. And my last question, I'm sorry. What cooperation have you found with hospitals who sometimes have the victim brought in, and I'm finding that sometimes the reporting and law enforcement getting engaged is coming very late in the process. The person may be identified as suffering from neglect or malnutrition, pressure sores, but APS is not called right away. They're called at the point of discharge. And then APS does their investigation, and then it's reported to the state's attorney's office. And then law enforcement, Baltimore Police Department may be looped in. My concern is the loss of evidence, circumstantial evidence that would be so helpful. And I don't think that's the intention of any of these groups, but I'm wondering how we get to that sooner, if there's any recommendations you got.
It's a good question. I do think it depends on, it's like a case by case, and it almost depends on who the ER, if it's an ER situation, nurse might be. We do try to provide education. We have a very good relationship with our forensic unit, nursing unit, Dr. Volts, with the Adventist Healthcare. So they're very much in tune. We did a presentation that they present for us and our teams. So building up those relationships is important. On this case that we just talked about, there was a wound clinic manager who had seen the patient who eventually died a month after we got involved, but they had seen this patient for a couple of months, and they were working on the lower legs, but there was got to be some kind of decubiti or wound on the sacral region, and they smelled stuff, and they thought, well, she's just not taken good care of. We wish we would have gotten a call at that point. So it really is key wherever we're at in that whole, if they're visiting with wound clinics or ERs, or even with their own physician, we're encouraging folks to reach out to us so that we can, do some more preventative work if possible. But good question.
Shelley.
Good afternoon. I'm from a police department down in Florida, where the average age is about 69 years of age. And I'm embarrassed to say I have never heard of MDTs until this class. So I'm highly interested. If anyone's from Florida and wants to come visit me on a break, share some information, I am an open book. I will hear whatever you have to say. But my question is, as someone who's interested in trying to pursue starting up this type of, multidisciplinary team, what kind of roadblocks and pitfalls do you anticipate or you experienced through that process? And what kind of the different disciplines, do you find certain disciplines are more difficult to maintain participation with or in the group?
So I think the biggest part of the whole thing really was understanding each other. I mean, I started with APS, and I'm going to say, I'll be honest, I don't think I ever told you this. I started and was like, oh, they're social workers. They'll be easy to talk to. They're not. But no, and I went there with that kind of thought process of, hey, they'll listen and let me see if this is even possible. That was the thought process for me. So, and I don't know what your situation is in Florida, but I agree that, yeah, you got to have a starting point. And if you can find that right person there at APS, that would be great. Or if you have the right prosecutor you can talk to, because once you start getting that group kind of together, and what we did, we kind of built this. I kind of told Debbie what I was doing on the side. And then we started working it together, because these guys don't get involved till way later sometimes, right? At least in our traditional system of criminal justice. So when she saw what was going on and how it was progressing, and it actually progressed way faster than anybody thought, once we kind of figured out some of the kinks, and the kinks were really understanding. Like, we brought all of the APS agents and all the detectives in, like, not only for the training, but for for the physical training, but for like a day of training of, this is what I do, this is what you do. And then Debbie and one of her other folks came in and did the whole thing about the prosecutors and what we could do and couldn't do as an entity. And that really helped. that really brought things around. We had them over in our office. We went to theirs. It just changed once we started seeing each other and we weren't hiding behind phones and email. I think that's the other big part too. I'm not a huge fan of doing that. I like, as you saw me walking around, I like being in people's faces, not in a bad way. But I think that's important. So it's just really taking that first step. I hate to say that, but that's really the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, and I would just add, we've had a number of different jurisdictions come, as I said, and sit in on our task force meetings and also receive kind of a packet of information from us with the MOUs, the confidentiality agreement, our case request form, just sort of the basic startup kit. And I often hear the barrier is it's one agency that just doesn't buy in. Out of the different agencies, how is it that you got APS to talk to you on the regular? How did you get a person to talk to there? And in some ways it was luck. We were really fortunate because not only were we all in those places at the time, but we had the buy-in, as I said before, from the higher ups. And I think getting the higher up to buy into this process and then having them talk to each other, it's a good thing for our electeds that we have this because they're able, and we do a report every 5 years. That reports out kind of all of the accomplishments. Actually, I think we do it every 3 years. That reports out all the accomplishments that have been done, and it is a good look for people who are looking to get elected and or to really be able to speak with pride about something that's working within their department or agency. So that's really, I think, it's almost like you have to work up in your own agency and also to the side with people on the same level as you at their agency. And then they need to work up at their agency as well, with the hierarchy. And, but I will tell you that I've heard on numerous occasions that, or it's the prosecutor's office, our prosecutor's office won't talk to APS, or vice versa, some combination of all of that. We've also benefited, we're the representatives of 3 of the agencies at the table, but I mentioned before guardianship. That's the county attorney's office who's at the table. We also have a medical professional at the table. So either it's someone from within APS, or we bring in, if the victim has received a forensic exam at one of our local hospitals, we also bring in that person again. And we've spent years building those collaborations. I've been in my role as the chief of our special victims division for 12 years now. And when I started, these relationships were not in place and I made it a priority. And I guess it's just convincing the right people to buy into it, which I obviously did. So.
And I'll just say, because I have heard in different jurisdictions, either in Maryland or elsewhere, because we present in different other states, that sometimes the Department of Social Services or Adult Protective Services, or maybe it's with aging, they're not buying in. It always surprises me. But Jordan reminded me that early on when we were revamping our elder abuse task force, we did have a full day conference with CEUs. And if you have licensed social workers and nurses, they love CEUs. And it's probably the same for law enforcement. So if you can pull together some training, you're going to show there's a value added just from that standpoint, and they're getting those CEUs. And then you start with a case and you work it from there. But having that consistency and the buy-in at the top is key. And a champion, I wanted to say, having a champion. And I'm really curious where in Florida you're at. I'm going down to Pinellas County.
He's not going to tell you.
So, come see me. If I can help you down in Pinellas, I'll be there this weekend.
I would actually, sorry, I just wanted to add one other thing. Wait, based on something you said. Now, sorry, I got all distracted by the county thing. It'll come back to me. Sorry, there's another question. Let's do that.
Gotta use the microphone.
I don't think the mic's on. You're on mute. Next slide.
Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify so that we're not, people don't have false expectations. There are a little, we use the term multidisciplinary team for a lot of different kinds of teams, and they may look very different in different communities. For example, I coordinated a team for many years that was really considered a consultation team, where unlike this team, you would have one person from any agency in town who could bring in a case And they were really coming to get ideas and suggestions and to brainstorm. But the case stayed with them, and they would go back and discuss, the options with their client, and may come back to the team to tell them what happened. But it wouldn't necessarily be like your team where everyone collaborates on the same case. So that's just one variation.
And I'm really glad that you shared that, because this is not a one size fits all. And we've brought different people in and out, over the years, from different places. And I remember the other barrier, and then we'll come back to you. The other barrier was the confidentiality piece. What could APS share with us and when, because of all of their confidentiality requirements. So we spent a lot of time and a lot of care working on that. I'm sorry if I cut you off.
No, it's just another point. And in relation to the question about barriers, one of the things I think a lot of teams discover is barriers that they face, like systemic barriers. And so some teams actually start getting into that area. In California, we started what we call an A team, which is a team that allows us to deal with the kinds of systemic barriers that the local teams are discovering. Because when I was in San Francisco, we were finding, for example, that people were trying to get domestic violence restraining orders on elder abuse cases, and they didn't meet the criteria. And so they pushed and they tried to finesse, and it finally, we realized that was untenable. So we're able to go back and get legislation changed, but that's really beyond the bandwidth and the expertise and the resources of most teams. So that was why we created this other kind of team. But those kinds of things could get you really hung up too. So.
Yeah, again, another great point. We have actually collaborated on legislative efforts as well over the course of years, really, so that we can, if there's laws that we want to see change, and then we work together, and then we're able to kind of share examples and that kind of stuff, and actually go in front of the legislature and testify and gather testimony, written or oral testimony for that.
And I think one of the biggest selling points, at least to my chief at the time, was when we were starting to put this together. And I'm not kidding. I looked right at him and I said, "You're getting older. Do you want to make sure that you have somebody investigating this correctly?" And I wasn't kidding. And he goes, "No, that's a good point." And he took it to heart, which was good. And he actually backed us pretty quickly, which was nice. And because he was on the fence, he's like, and I get it. We have limited resources, right? Am I going to put my resources here or there? And so I had to make a case for it. And thankfully he bought into it, and it was good. But like Debbie said, like Mario said, you got to get your heads of state to get in line. Otherwise, nothing else is going to happen, especially when you leave.
Anyone else? Oh, we have one over here to the left.
I'll just shout out loud. Our MDT.
Yep. It's just me though.
Where I elsewhere, I bring them along. So I'm sort of the hub connecting APS and the local law enforcement folks on complex cases, not all cases, but cases where it's time sensitive, whether it's a neglect case like this where somebody's been transported to the hospital, we need to get a detective assigned immediately. So rather than waiting for that quarterly meeting when you're going to lose evidence or you're going to lose momentum, we are triaging those cases as an MDT in real time. And we've also trained our coroner investigators they don't get training in California as a coroner investigator about what is neglect. So we've been reaching out and training them, and then also creating that same model. So rather than waiting for a quarterly elder death review team to investigate a possible neglect related death, we do those in real time as well.
Thank you so much. Well, this has been great. We really appreciate you. Let's give them a warm hand, a round of applause.
Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.
Andy, I think you're coming back.
Close this out. You guys can stay. I won't be very long. No, it's fine. Again, just a few thoughts. One, I think it's clear the benefits of collaboration. We heard that throughout the conference, but I think this team really hammered that home. The other thing I was just going to say is that you're not alone. I've heard states at very different places, but it's clear that we are all struggling with the same types of issues, but there's a tremendous amount of wisdom and experience here. Everything that we have talked about in terms of tools, trainings, whatever, we will try to consolidate all of that and share that with you all. in the coming weeks to come. Lastly, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come to this summit, to share and be part of this discussion, and for taking time out of your busy schedules. And also thank you in advance. I will be reaching out to all of you and to your organizations, and I look forward to collaborating with all of you. There's a lot of work to be done. I think this is a great start, but I think there's lots more to be done to protect and serve older Americans. So thank you. Safe travels home. We will be in touch. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.